What do you want to be when you grow up?
A murderer because I like killing. My brain tells me if I like killing. I like killing because when I first watched my grown-up killing show, myself started to like killing, and then my brain started to like tell me what to do with killing in it. So I like murders and I like killing in my life. I'm gonna kill everybody in the world except for my family because they just didn't do anything to me. I just like killing.
So just any type of person, it doesn't matter. What about me?
Yeah.
Even me?
No, not even my teachers either.
Okay, because I'm the first person that you told this. Am I? Yeah?
So I just like killing.
So what are you going to be again when you grow up?
A murderer.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, Shalom. I want to start off by giving all our praise, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakak Wadash. I'd like to give double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who I learned this truth from. And I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. And today, I'm just going to, be doing a response to this video, which I've done, a video on this clip before, but just to, redo another video just to show you that, this is the nature of Esau, the so-called white man, that they're murderers by nature. Excuse me, Slakia. And that, it's just in their nature, to shed blood and want to shed blood, man. And as you can see, that young man or, that little boy, he had to be anywhere between, 6'2", probably I'd say 7 to 8 years old. But what did he say? When the teacher asked him, which she kind of sounded like, a so-called black woman. But she asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. And what did he say? Even though, he said it wrong, but what? He said he wanted to be a murderer when he grows up, He didn't say he wanted to be a police officer, a firefighter, a doctor, nothing like that. He said he wants to murder people, Why? Because that same spirit that's in Esau is in, and I'm referring to the man Esau himself. That same spirit that's in him is in, his children, and we can see it. There's numerous examples of, how violent this nation of people is, but what? They point the finger at us and say that, we're violent, we're murderers. Now, our people, they do wickedness, they do commit murders, but what? It's not in our nature, man, to just take a life without cause, So I'm just going to bring out a few scriptures, Lord willing. This lesson is edifying and straight to the point, and we just have to, I'm going to go straight to the point to the first murderer, I'm going to start with Genesis chapter 4 and verse 8. And just to give a little background, before I read this verse, because, the verses, the previous verses is going into how, Cain and Abel, they were giving their sacrifices unto the Lord, Abel, gave his sacrifice and it was accepted. But what? Cain gave his, sacrifice and it was rejected. Why? Because they knew the law, because it was passed down orally, so they knew to do right, which was to, sacrifice, the firstlings, of their flock, so 9 times out of 10, a sheep or a goat, but, a sheep of the first year, without blemish, just like it says, when we, keep the Passover, when we sacrifice, an animal, we get the lamb, for the Passover, how we're supposed to keep it. Obviously, we can't keep it, 100% perfect, here in America, but, just proving a point, but he gave the first fruit of his flock, which is, 9 times out of 10, a lamb, first year, a male, without blemish, without spot or blemish, and he sacrificed it and it was accepted. But what? Cain gave, fruit, which he knew to do better, but he didn't, and he got angry and he was jealous. Slakia. And he was jealous that his brother, Slakia, man. And he was jealous, that his brother's, sacrifice was, accepted, but his wasn't. He was angry, and then what? That eventually caused him to do what? Slay Abel. So this is the book of Genesis chapter 4 and verse 8, and it says, and Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. So they were probably out in the field, working, and Cain came up and slew him. How exactly, did he do it? We'll find out, when we get to the kingdom. But again, he murdered Abel, Verse 9, it says, and the Lord said unto Cain, where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, what hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. So right, once Abel, he died, his spirit went back to the Heavenly Father, and he was, pretty much letting him know, like, hey, this guy, he just murdered me, That's his blood crying from the ground, man, because again, he just shed innocent blood, Abel didn't do anything wrong. But what? This man was jealous, So not only did he commit murder, but he also lied, And that's the nature of the nation of Edom. They're murderers and they're liars, But again, primarily focusing on them being murderers, So that same spirit that was in Cain eventually went to Esau, right? And let's get that in Genesis chapter 27 and verse 44. It's like, not 44, verse 41. Because just like, again, the backstory with Jacob and Esau, right? Jacob supplanted Esau, not once but twice. But as we know or should know, that in Genesis 25th chapter, Esau, he gave up his birthright for what? That pottage. Jacob was cooking. Esau, he was hungry. He couldn't wait until Jacob was done, preparing the food. So what? He gave it to him. So Jacob told him, give me this day thy birthright. He didn't care about it. He didn't have respect into it. So what? He just gave it to him. So then what? Fast forward, to Genesis the 27th chapter. What? Jacob, supplanted Isaac out of the blessing, which Rebekah helped Jacob, pretend to be Esau so that he can, get a blessing from Isaac, which again, the blessing that he received was ultimately going to go to, Jacob and, his sons anyway, but that's just how the Lord set it up. But what? He supplanted, Esau again. And then Esau got his blessing. So, as a matter of fact, let me start up. Because this is the nature of Esau, man. And I'll start at verse 38. Because I pretty much gave you, the back story. This is Genesis chapter 27 and verse 38. And it says, and Esau said unto his father, hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth and the dew of heaven from above. So, right, Esau, he has the best of everything right now. Obviously, America is declining, but prior to this place, failing, financially, America, or they had, really the elites, they have the best of everything, man. They literally have, the world in the palm of their hands, man. They can get whatever they want, You know, they have the best of everything. And even some of these, average, Joe Six-Pack Edomites, they're living good. Obviously they may not be now because of what's going on in this, current society, but, whatever. But again, they have, the best of everything. But what? In verse 40, it says, and by thy sword shalt thou live, and shall serve thy brother, and it shall come to pass when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break the yoke, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. And right, and it says, by thy sword shalt thou live, man. And that's how Esau lives, by a sword, which is what? His weaponry, which is not just limited, to the gun. He has all different types of weapons, the gun probably being literally, I heard one of the brothers say this, the guns are probably Esau's weakest sword, Now, obviously they can do damage, but still, his ultimate sword being nuclear missiles, man. Weapons that literally have the capability of destroying the planet Earth, But we know that that won't happen because just like it says in Ecclesiastes, the earth abideth forever, so the entire planet Earth won't be destroyed. But again, man, that's how he lives, by his sword, by violence, man. He loves to shed blood, Verse 41, and this is the point, it says, and Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. So right, he was jealous. He was angry because Jacob got the blessing. So when you read about the blessings that are going to go to the children of Israel in the future, that's what he's angry about, because he wanted his blessings, but what? He gave up his birthright, which is supposed to go to the firstborn son, because Esau was the firstborn son, but that's how the Lord set it up, But either way, he gave up his birthright, and then he also lost that blessing, which is why he has a perpetual hatred for the Israelites, right? So I'm going to restart that. This is Genesis chapter 27 and verse 41. And it says, and Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then will I slay my brother Jacob. And right, man. Isaac, he was up in age, so, he was about ready to, die. So what? He said the days of mourning for my father at hand. So, Isaac was probably going to die soon. So what? He was going to mourn Isaac, and then what? He says, all right, now I'm going to kill Jacob. He's a murderer by nature, right? I'm just going to read verse 42, and it says, and these words of Esau, her elder son, were told to Rebekah, and she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, which Rebekah loved Jacob, Isaac loved Esau, and said unto him, behold, thy brother Esau, as touching thee, doth comfort himself, proposing to kill thee. And right, Esau wanted to kill Jacob, which he didn't, and that's just, again, me proving that Esau Edom is a murderer. He's jealous and he's a murderer, So the very same spirit that was on Cain was on Esau. That very same spirit that was on Esau are on the Edomites. All of those, all of his children, they came after him, man. A bunch of lying, slandering murderers, man. And this ain't just me getting on video talking shit, man. This is factual, And these verses that I'm about to bring out alone prove your nature. This is the book of Ezekiel, chapter 35 and verse 5. And it says, because thou hast had a perpetual hatred and hast shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword in the time of their calamity, and the time that their iniquity had an end. So right, it says thou hast had a perpetual hatred, man. So this hatred stems all the way back to, not just, the Edomites hating, the tribes, but it goes back to, Jacob and Esau, and even further back to Cain and Abel, and even further back to, the serpent in the garden, man. They've always had a perpetual hatred for us, man. Because we're the righteous and they're the wicked. Verse 6 says, therefore, as I live, saith the Lord Yahweh, I will prepare thee unto blood, and blood shall pursue thee. Sith thou hast not hated blood, even blood shall pursue thee. And right, man, this man has had a perpetual hatred for us, which is why, again, you see with that little boy, he said he wanted to be a murderer when he grows up, man. And what? It says that most serial killers are so-called white men. You have guys like John Wayne Gacy, the clown, killer, Ed Gaines, which I haven't, really done. Well, I haven't seen the documentary that is released on him. Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Charles Manson, just to name a few, all white men. Most of the serial killers just here in America alone have been so-called white men, But yet Esau, in classic Edomite nature, you point the finger at us and say that we're the murderers, when this is what you people are known for, This is why, these other nations are going to come up against you, because all of the evil that you've done in the earth, man. This is why when our Lord Yahweh Shai comes back, he's coming back to take you out. The other nations as well, but he's coming back for you first, But, this is just your nature, man. You love blood. You love to share blood. You love to eat it. You love to drink it. You're a bloody nation of people. And this is why you have to be taken out of power, So I'm going to end it with this. This is the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2 and verse 4. It says, behold, his soul which is lifted up is not Slakia. Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. And right, the main point being is that the souls that are in these people, they're not upright, man. They're demons, They're the devil that the Bible speaks of, man. You have the physical Satan, and then you have, Satan in the flesh, which I'm not saying that these people are literally Satan, but still, man. If Satan was in the flesh and it was a nation of people, it would be you so-called white people, you Edomites. Why? Because you love to murder, not kill, because there's a difference between murdering and killing. You people love to murder. You people love to shed blood, especially who? The children of Israel, So Lord willing, this lesson was edifying. I want to give our praise, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakodash. I'd like to give double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are not this truth from. And I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. Till the next time I say, Shalom.